Have you ever paused to ask yourself, who really ruled the ancient world? Was it kings with golden crowns? Generals on horseback? Priests who claimed divine favor? Or was it someone else entirely, someone quieter, sharper, with no throne or army, yet capable of turning empires into puppets? Now picture this. A caravan of camels winding through the dusty sands of Arabia, their backs heavy with silk, incense, and gold. Merchants haggle in distant ports, their tongues blending Phoenician, Greek, and Sanskrit. On the sea, ships carved from cedar cut through waves, not for conquest, but for profit. It was in moments like these, away from the glory of temples and the thunder of battle, that the ancient world's real power brokers made their mark. They were the first corporations, trade syndicates, and merchant dynasties companies before the word even existed. And they didn't just thrive. For a time, they ruled the known world. Let us uncover 5 of the most powerful and fascinating ancient companies that left empires trembling not with war, but with wealth. The first story takes us to the dusty shores of ancient Phoenicia, to a people who lived not for land, but for the sea. They called themselves Canaanites, but the Greeks knew them as Phoenicians, purple people, named for the vibrant dye. They traded far and wide. These were no simple merchants. They were master shipbuilders, unrivaled navigators, and silent architects of commerce. Their homeland, nestled along the Levantine coast, offered little in terms of fertile soil or mineral riches, so they looked outward. And they built an empire not of swords and stone, but of sail and silver. The Phoenicians created what many historians now consider the world's first multinational trading syndicate. Their ships reached the distant shores of Spain, North Africa, and even Britain. They didn't conquer these lands. They connected them. Their cargoes held cedarwood, glass, papyrus, and most famously Tyrian purple, the dye extracted painstakingly from murex snails, worth its weight in gold. But this company, if you can call it that, was more than just trade. It shaped alphabets. The Phoenician script, efficient, adaptable, laid the foundation for Greek, Latin, and eventually our modern writing systems. Their legacy isn't just written on parchment. It's written in the way we communicate. And yet, the very brilliance that lifted the Phoenicians doomed them. Their cities Tyre, Sidon, and Byblus became targets. First Assyria, then Babylon, and finally, Alexander the Great brought their dominance to an end. But their influence lingered, quietly woven into every coin exchanged in ancient markets, every letter scratched into clay or inked on papyrus. Now we move west, to a rocky peninsula jutting into the central Mediterranean. Here, another power emerged not from imperial ambition, but from a relentless drive for commerce. Carthage, founded by Phoenician settlers, Carthage began as a colony, but it evolved into something far greater. A naval titan, a city whose lifeblood was trade, whose gods demanded offerings, not of war, but of wealth. The Carthaginian empire was built through business. They established ports from Morocco to Sicily, controlling key trade routes across the Mediterranean. Their merchants were cunning, their contracts binding, their reach immense. They traded in gold, silver, ivory, slaves, and spices. They managed a complex network of client cities, alliances, and tolls. Their harbor, built in a perfect circle, was an engineering marvel, housing hundreds of warships and merchant vessels alike. At its heart was the Safida role-blending CEO and statesman, guiding Carthage's commercial destiny. Families like the Magonides and Barsades operated like dynasties of bankers and generals combined. Hannibal, the famed general who marched elephants over the Alps, was not merely a military leader, he was also the scion of a commercial dynasty, bent on preserving Carthaginian dominance. But with greatness came risk. Rome, the rising republic across the sea, grew wary, jealous, and the Punic Wars erupted, 3 brutal conflicts that shook the Mediterranean. Carthage lost, not once, not twice, but fatally. In 146 BCE, Rome razed the city, salted its earth, and buried centuries of commercial genius beneath ash and memory. Still, Carthage's model endured. Rome, ironically, absorbed many of its methods: naval logistics, tax contracts, and even merchant classes. The company that was Carthage may have burned, but its blueprint survived. Now shift your gaze to the east, to the windswept mountains of Central Asia and the rolling sands of the Silk Road. Here another kind of company ruled, not bound by borders, but by caravans, and at its center was the Sogdian trading network. The Sogdians weren't kings, they weren't warriors, but they were, perhaps, the greatest intermediaries of their time. From their homeland in modern day, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, they created one of history's most intricate trade networks, spanning from the Chinese Temps Empire to the heart of Persia and beyond. These weren't disjointed travelers. They were families, syndicates, merchant clans with coded languages, trusted agents, and multi-generational wealth. They moved silk, jade, horses, tea, spices, and ideas. Buddhism spread along Sogdian paths. So did Nestorian Christianity, Persian philosophies, and artistic traditions that reshaped Eurasia. They built way stations, forged multilingual contracts, and developed early forms of credit and correspondence. The Thames emperors trusted them, the Persians respected them, and their influence was so profound that when China's Zhuangzang journeyed west in the 7th century, it was Sogdian traders who guided him. But as with all things, politics shifted. The rise of Islam, the collapse of Thames power, and the Mongol invasions eventually fractured their networks. Still, fragments of Sogdian writing, buried in the Taklamakan desert, whisper of a forgotten commercial empire nimble. Now we cross oceans to the Indian subcontinent, to Gujarat, to Tamalakam, two ancient ports whose names echo like forgotten prayers. Here, the ancient Indian guilds known as the Shrinis were more than trade groups. They were corporations in every meaningful sense. Each guild specialized in a craft, whether it was metalwork, textiles, spices, or banking. They trained apprentices, managed internal regulations, and even wielded judicial powers. Some Shrinis accumulated such wealth that they funded temples, lent money to kings, and minted their own coins. One guild, specializing in weaving, left behind inscriptions boasting of their donations to Buddhist monasteries stretching from Sri Lanka to Central Asia. Another guild of bankers, the Sethis, held power equivalent to ministers. What set the Shrinis apart was their social integration. They weren't outsiders or foreign traders. They were embedded within the cultural and religious life of India. Jain merchants practiced non-violence even in commerce. Buddhist guilds promoted ethical trade. Hindu guilds linked wealth to dharma or moral order. Yet, these guilds weren't immune to change. Invasions, the rise of centralized kingdoms, and eventually, colonial disruption altered their autonomy. But in their time, the Shrinis were institutions of both profit and principle. Ancient companies that didn't just chase wealth, they defined how it should be earned. And finally, we journey to the land of pyramids and papyrus, ancient Egypt, but not to its pharaohs or priests, to a lesser-known powerhouse, the temple economy of Karnak and the granary corporations of the Nile. You see, Egypt's wealth didn't simply flow from gold mines or taxes. It flowed through institutions that functioned, in essence, like economic conglomerates. The temples, especially those in Thebes and Memphis, weren't just religious centers. They were warehouses, banks, employers. They managed vast estates, controlled trade routes, and employed thousands of artisans and laborers. One of the most prominent was the Temple of Amun at Karnak. It owned ships, employed scribes, controlled entire agricultural districts. Its treasury rivaled the states, and its high priests sometimes held more power than the pharaoh himself. Meanwhile, Egypt's granary system, essential for survival in a land dependent on the Nile's rhythm, operated like a centralized logistics company. Grain wasn't just food, it was currency. It paid workers, settled debts, and underpinned the economy. In moments of drought or famine, these institutions determined who lived or died. Their decisions could spark migration, rebellion, or royal overthrows. And yet, their role remains overshadowed by the grandeur of kingship. But make no mistake, behind every pharaoh's monument stood economic engines that ensured the kingdom's survival. These 5 entities, the Phoenician syndicates, the Carthaginian trade empire, the Sogdian merchant networks, the Indian Shrinis, and Egypt's temple corporations were more than historical curiosities. They were the prototypes of modern capitalism. They navigated politics, forged alliances, controlled supply chains, and shaped the destiny of millions, all without armies. They remind us that power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears robes, or travels by ship, or signs a ledger in a candlelit room. And in a world where companies today stretch across continents, influence elections, and define lifestyles, these ancient predecessors feel eerily familiar. Their legacies whisper a caution that commerce, like conquest, leaves marks that time alone cannot erase. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, take a moment to reflect on how much of our world still echoes the patterns of the past. I invite you to leave a comment with your thoughts, what surprised you most, or which ancient company you'd like to learn more about. And if you'd like more journeys like this into the hidden corners of history, told with passion and truth, please like this video. Share it with a fellow history lover, and subscribe to the channel, because the past isn't just behind us. It's inside everything we do. Thank you for watching.